Right, thank you very much for turning up, and obviously a special thank you to the mayor, who's worked very hard. I'm not sure if you're aware, but worked very hard in background to make this happen. You should definitely thank him afterwards, and I'm sure he would like some help in arranging future events. So big kudos to him. Well done for being here. Before I introduce David and pass on to him, I just wanted to show one thing on the board here. The mayor has set this up as well. Okay, Slido, I don't know if you're aware of it. You can either just Google it, SLIDO, or you can go straight onto the website, sli.do. That code there, 80900, if you type that in, you can put any questions on there, and then they'll come straight through to the mayor so that they can be answered and discussed later on. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we can all get that up and running.
Just run it on your phone, and you can just type in a question there in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll answer it. So
awesome. Cool. So I'm going to pass on. Okay. So as I said, the mayor's worked very hard. We're very grateful to have David Macdonald here. Okay. He is the founder of the Path Financial, and he'll be talking about this in a lot more detail, what they're doing and why they are interested in speaking to you. So thank you very much, Amir, and thank you very much, David, for taking the time.
Okay, thank you for that welcome, and thank you also to Damir for setting up today's session. So it's a privilege to be invited to be the inaugural speaker of the Investment Club. It's quite difficult to know exactly how to pitch this talk, really. So just as we'll move through the slides to the agenda, just to the theme, I think, was is investing just luck. So the agenda, first of all, is to talk about why to invest. Second of all, what is an investment? And then when we're talking about investment, we might want to think about what's value, like maybe what's a good time to invest in. Then talking a little bit about investment basics. And my particular specialism is ethical and impact investing. And you might ask yourself, well, what's impact investing? I'll seek to answer that, and then we'll wrap up at the end with just reflecting on the material that we've gone through to ask ourselves whether indeed investment is a gamble. Now, this has got a challenge for me. I've got 30 years experience in this, and I've got about 30 minutes to convey 30 years experience. So forgive me, it's going to be a very quick canter through some investment basics. So hold on to your hats and do get those questions in on Slido if there's anything that you'd like me to expand on. And I'm sure the slides can be distributed at the end if that's useful. So first of all, why invest? And it's probably quite an interesting question at your stage of life. Well, what's the point? Why would I invest? What's in it for me? Well, let's just take the example that you were. It doesn't matter what the number is, it's the shape of the chart that's the important thing. Let's say you had a £30,000 a year income, that was your capacity to earn. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, you didn't want to work forever. Every pound that you can have come in of investment income is one less pound that you need to earn. So one way of thinking about investment, I suppose, is in a long-term scenario, how do I get myself to have financial independence? That to say, don't have to work for a living. Other ways of looking at it, and possibly a more entrepreneurial short-term view, and certainly a young person in a hurry's view, would be how do I make a quick dollar? How do I capitalize on things? Where can I get some money quickly? So we'll talk to that as well. So just thinking about investment and why you would do it. Let's say you could make a 5% rate of return, which is way more than you would get from a bank interest at the moment, but in the overall scheme of things, it's not a fantastic rate of return. These curves are just showing how much of your income you could replace, I suppose, depending on how long you saved for. The red line's just showing us if you saved only 5% of your income and you achieved a 5% rate of return, you would never replace your income from your investments. You'd never accumulate enough money. In fact, at a 5% rate of return, it would take you 50 years to become financially independent if you saved 10% of your income. And even with 25% of your income saved every year for your working life, it would take you 30 some years to become financially independent at a 5% rate of return. So fine, looks like hard graft, looks like a long working life. If you could double that investment return, the curves get a lot shorter. So trying to achieve a better return looks like quite a sensible idea, and saving a percentage of your income every year to achieve financial independence probably looks like quite a good idea too. You can now retire after sort of 30 some years, even with just saving 5% of income, and really financial independence can come quite quickly with a decent investment return. Compound interest, which is the sort of eighth wonder of the world. Just look at how those exponential charts are going stratospheric at this point. So you get to this kind of exponential tipping point quickly, and then, you know, there's no stopping you at that point. So moving on, that might just answer the question, why invest? The next question, I suppose, is, well, what is an investment? So let's just talk to that for a moment. And in my estimation, an investment is something that makes money from money. Or to put it another way, it's something that works so that you don't have to. And that's all very nice. I mean, there are alternatives. Trading is potentially an option. You might say it's rather similar to investment. You buy something cheap and you aim to sell it at a higher price. It's the same with investing. You buy some shares maybe, or some Bitcoin or whatever it might be, and you think, I've bought this cheap, I'll sell it when it's got a higher price. With trading, there's some risk. The outcome is reasonably predictable. And there's a spectrum of things. You know, if you've got a source to buy something in one market cheaply and sell it more expensively in another, then that's quite predictable, but markets move. Some things are less predictable. Bitcoin, for example, you've got no control over the outcome, and it looks much more speculative. And shares probably come somewhere in the middle. So let's see where we go with that. Gambling, well, this was the question that we were being asked, is investment all just a gamble? Well, I would say the definition of gambling is that you've got an unpredictable outcome. It might be somewhat predictable, I suppose, based on form and something that you might know that the person you're betting with doesn't know, but generally gambling is around hope and an unpredictable outcome. And there's some crossover. Casino is an obvious place to go and gamble. You could gamble on a coin toss, or you could still gamble on Bitcoin or some of these other trendy things which may or may not do really well. And then, of course, in the early days, you need to get some money in order that you can invest some money. And how are you going to do that? Well, work. You sell your labor. Not a smart plan in the long run if you want to be financially independent. But quite frankly, I would say to you, one of the best investments you can possibly make is in yourself, to upskill yourself, give yourself the highest capacity at being able to get the seed corn money together to then be able to go on to invest. So let's just now talk about investment in terms of something that we can all relate to, I think. So introducing the concept of investment by way of property investment. I think property is a relatively straightforward investment to understand. We've got two lines on here. The blue one is the value of the property. And this is a true life story. This was my first investment property that I bought back in 1996. So you buy a property, and we all know that if property prices go up, we'll make money by owning the asset. But that's quite a volatile journey. Whilst this property has been owned, the price has gone up, the price has gone down, the price has gone back up again. So a bit like stock markets, the price is somewhat volatile. but the rent is very predictable, very boring. And if you can buy an asset when the price is low and the yield is high, you really can't go wrong. Even today, where the price of this particular property is more than quadrupled over 25 years and the rent's only doubled, it's still a reliable investment with a yield much higher than you would get from the bank. So there's two elements, I suppose, to making a return in many investments. One is what the price of the investment is doing. What can you get for the thing that you've bought? And the other one is the income or the yield that it generates. And we're just going to talk about yield and price and value a little bit. And hopefully that this is the main sort of takeaway from the talk. So let's just talk about properties a little bit. They're fine as far as they go. But can you influence the value of the property? You can, all you can really do is, the only thing that you can do is look at the timing of buying it. But if your property is the same as all the others in the street, then it's got the same value as all the others in the street, more or less. You can improve it a little bit, but there's absolute rigid bookends in terms of what the maximum and the minimum value would be. Can you improve the income that you get from it? Well, that's arguably a little bit easier. You can turn it into bedsits, turn a living room into a bedroom, and maybe the yield can go up, but it doesn't fundamentally affect the value of your investment. The value is dictated by the market, and indeed the rental to some extent is dictated by the market as well. So if that's property and you can invest in something where the value goes up and down and you've got a fairly predictable income, this is just a look at what stock markets have done over the same period. And similarly, markets go up and markets go down. And obviously it's better to buy when the market is low, because then you make more money. The trick to it is when is low, because nobody waves a flag when the market's at its lowest point. Nobody sends out a warning signal when the market's at its highest point. And we all know that stock market investment can be quite volatile and markets go up and down. So we've got the price. What I'd like to show then is the rent effectively that you get from holding stock. Now, an investment in stocks and shares, an investment in a company's shares, you're hoping that the price of the shares goes up over time. Well, why would it go up or why would it go down? Most companies are set up to pay value to shareholders. So you get paid for holding the shares, and that payment is called a dividend. And different companies have got different dividends that they pay depending on the level of profit that they make, and also depending on the share price. Dividends, like property rent, tend to be very stable, very reliable. They don't stop, they keep chugging on just like property rent does. Certain factors can make the yield change. If the share price goes down a lot, the yield goes up. And if companies are more profitable, then they can afford to pay higher dividends, and so the share price goes up. But anyway, here's just a range of dividends that can be achieved from some of the bigger companies in the UK stock market. So moving on. So to that point, well, you can't particularly influence what's going on in terms of the profit that a company makes, but the company's management can. So if you're smart at picking companies whose management can increase the profit of the business, either by increasing market share, by improving pricing, by new products, and you might think of Apple as a good example of this, high barrier.
Can we take a after this slide, can we take a few questions?
Yeah.
That's all right.
Just to be honest, we'll take a couple of questions after this. So sure. So yeah, influence here would be if the profit of the company goes up, the company can afford to pay a higher dividend. And if the company is paying a higher dividend, then the company's always worth a multiple, I suppose, of that dividend. So if you can buy shares in an emerging technology, in someone who's capturing some market share, then you've got the possibility of the value of your share increasing quite dramatically. And of course, the opposite's true. We're going to talk about companies whose values might be severely challenged, like oil companies, for example. If we're not going to hit environmental disasters, the value of oil companies, i.e. the amount of oil that they hope to sell, which is on their balance sheet, they can't be allowed to bring out of the ground. So pick badly and your investment can go down.
Okay. Hi, David. Can I just interrupt you here for just a second? I just want to let you guys know about dividends and stuff. Do you know what that is when investing and how it relates to whether you want to buy the stock or not? Does anyone know? Dividends. Never. Okay. So maybe you want to give a brief introduction to what dividends are, just to and show how it comes into play when choosing what to invest in. Maybe that's a good idea before we obviously go further into it.
Sorry, Damir, is that you'd like me to expand on dividends a little bit more?
Yeah, if that's okay, because I don't think many people know about how it relates to your choice and actually in what you invest in and what stocks you invest in.
Okay, so maybe if we spin back to the previous slide, the dividend one shows. So let's take HSBC as an example. Okay, so a bank. What do? They try and encourage people to deposit money with them, and the inducement that they give for you to put your money with the bank is that they pay you a rate of interest. So this is an investment because your money makes money for you without you doing anything for it. The interest rate is not very high. A typical deposit rate would be, say, 0.5% or something like that. But it's a safe place for you to keep your money. You can't get robbed in the same way as if it's in gold bars nailed under your floorboards or whatever you might deem a secure thing to do. So the bank pays you a small rate of interest, and then they lend your money to the customers who want to borrow money, and they might charge them 3%. So the bank's margin is the difference between what they take your money in at and they pay you, and what they get paid by the customers that borrow that money. So then the bank makes a profit, and the profit is distributed to the shareholders by way of a dividend. So they'll retain a certain amount of money to develop their product and their processes and run the business, but the rest of the profit is paid to the shareholders by way of a dividend. So a simple example, if you had 1,000 shares and 1,000 shareholders, you would take the profit that you've made, you'd divide it by 1,000, and you'd pay that out to the shareholders as a dividend. Now, if you could double the number of your customers and thereby, say, double the amount of your profit, you could afford to double the dividend that you pay. And if you did that, then so say, for example, the yield here would go up from 2.37%. If you double that, it would be 5%. Well, if banks have got a valuation of, I don't know, 40 times their profit, then obviously the share price would go up because you're getting a much higher dividend, and that pushes the price up. So really what I'm trying to do here is relate shares to properties. So property, the property price can go up or down, but generally up. And the rent can go up or down, but generally up. And with well-run companies, the share price can go up or down, generally up, and the dividend can go up or down, generally up. And the more profit that the company makes, the faster it can grow its dividend, the bigger of a payout it can give you, then the the more the share price will go up. And we're going to touch on an example of how that can happen in dramatic style in a minute. Demir, I don't think time allows me to dwell on that anymore. Hopefully that answers the question.
So basically you're saying, are you saying that a stock which is higher paying dividends, it's a better stock to invest in, or are there other factors to play?
Well, there are other factors to pay. I mean, you would look, here you look at British American Tobacco, it pays a dividend of 7.7%. Well, that's huge. Why would it be so high? BP pays a high dividend of almost 5%. Well, one of the reasons is that the share price of these companies has gone down quite a lot, in particular BP, and that if the price comes down and the dividend stays the same, then the dividend as a percentage goes up. So it can be a good value play to buy something with a higher dividend, or it might be that the business is looking like it's severely challenged for whatever reason. They might be paying out too high a dividend to try and retain shareholders. They might have stranded assets, like I would argue BP has got, and they may be in trouble. They may be out of favor. Businesses which kill their customers, like British American Tobacco, you know, are going to have some headwinds when it comes to governance and the popularity of that type of share amongst the investing public.
Yeah, okay. I think that's all we need to cover in. And I think if anyone has more questions about what dividends are, we can just do that to the end. I think. Yep. Thank you, David.
Okay, you're welcome. So just picking the pace up a little bit, let's talk now to the question of price and value. Because as an investor, you really, one of the things you're going to be thinking about very carefully is, am I buying at the right price? And what dictates price and what dictates value? And I think a good way of thinking about this is we can all agree which of these vehicles is going to have the higher price. That's not in doubt. It's a commodity. But which one has the most value? Well, you might say, obviously, it's the Ferrari. Or if you contemplate the situation that you're in, I would say that the value depends on your perspective, on your point of view, on what you need the investment to do for you. So in this situation, the Ferrari is of significantly lower value to you. So let's think, as we move on to the next slide, about what would constitute something with intrinsic value that we could invest in. And this is quite a sort of interesting philosophical question. We've seen bubbles in tulips in the 17th century. Are we seeing it in Bitcoin and GameStop at the moment? What's the value in a dollar bill of itself? Nothing. It's just a piece of paper. Coal and diamonds are the same thing. They're just carbon, but they're priced massively differently. Arguably, coal has a higher utility value because you can burn it and keep warm. What gives gold value is just scarcity. Is food actually, from a sort of hierarchy of needs point of view, probably worth more? Or friendship? Or is it buildings which can give us shelter and an income and have some utility? So there's a lot of factors which go into what represents value, or is it just fashion, or is it fear of missing out? And you've got to be very conscious of fear and greed are the two main drivers when it comes to valuation. So let's just be conscious of and thinking of what would represent value to you as potential investors. I'm going to skip quite quickly through the next couple of slides, which it takes the dividend question to a slightly more technical level, but this is investment basics. And the price earnings ratio is the number of, sorry, go back. price earnings ratio is the current share price divided by the amount of earnings that a company makes. And this is another indicator of when to buy. Long-term average of the price of a share is relative to the, I suppose, the dividend that it pays effectively is about 18 to 20 times. You can see the buying opportunities here. When that multiple goes lower, it's a good time to buy. When the multiple gets higher, it's possibly a less good time to buy. So then let's just move on to an example of this, a real life example of price earnings ratio. So in 2006, the Amazon share price was $39. And at that time, you were buying that business on a multiple of, you know, the share price effectively was, it took you 87 years worth of dividends to get back your original investment. It seemed like a crazy valuation. How could this business ever generate so much profit that it would justify that level of a PE ratio of 87? Well, just looking at the PE ratio of that particular share today, even today, 15 years on, this share is still trading at 62 times earnings, so 3 times the average of all shares. So the market is pricing in the likelihood of this company's shares having to triple just to get within what would be considered a normal range. But in those 15 years, the profits have gone up a lot. So although it's trading on a lower PE, the share price today is 3,200. Well, it's almost exactly 3,200 today. So the share price has gone up 100 times in 15 years. Not a bad investment, but you would have had to have been brave to have bought it on that valuation back in the day. So even though something is expensive or has a high price, it doesn't mean that it's expensive in terms of value, I suppose is the point of this. So having some vision around what might happen in the market is a seriously good idea. Thinking about what the future may hold is often a predictor to buying wisely. I'd like to wrap up in the last sort of 5 minutes or so talking about ethical investment and positive impact. Let's look at what David Attenborough has got to say on the subject. Capitalism, I guess, is a structure, a facility, a way of being which optimizes profit, possibly regardless of cost. And we've seen a lot of the businesses that were on that dividend slide are companies which put profit ahead of everything. And as the generation who are really going to have to contend with this and tidy up the messes of my generation, I suppose seems like quite an interesting point to begin to wrap up with as we look at investment fundamentals and what's important. Let's look at some of the companies that would constitute a typical investment fund, a typical pension, a typical stocks and shares ISA. By and large, these are British companies, and by and large, their output is troublesome for people and planet, shall we say. Fossil fuel companies, mining, the environmental impact of that is all too obvious. We've talked about tobacco companies, companies that are involved in bad, hideous farming methodologies, animal agriculture, diabetes, obesity, single-use plastic. To my mind, yes, you can make money from this, but the next slide just asks a couple of challenging questions. Is it the way that we want to make money? And are you happy making an investment return at the expense of exploiting people and planet? Or would you rather your investments were doing some more positive good, as well as potentially making money for you, as well as potentially making more money for you? I think this is the point. So I'd like to introduce you to the concept of positive impact investment, which is where you can invest not just on the basis of the amount of profit that companies are going to make, but on the basis that they're profitable companies, but whose products and services are aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where you're investing money in companies so that you make an investment return, but you're also giving them money to do the things which are going to be needed as we try to make the world sustainable and a more fair place for the world's population. And just to bring some color to that, it's maybe a very difficult infographic to read at the back of the room, but the top left circle there just shows us that £100,000 invested in the type of investment that the Path does with positive impact reduces the carbon emissions of your investment portfolio by 32 tons. So 100 grand moved from a traditional fund to a positive impact fund takes effectively 32 tons. It's got a 32 tons less CO2 equivalent emissions, which is the equivalent of taking 7 cars off the road. So I think that sort of puts things into perspective, as well as investing money into renewable energy and healthcare and a circular economy and recycling and what have you. So I'd just like to wrap up again to remind ourselves of the question of, is it all just a gamble? And we've talked about value, we've talked about price, and we've talked about vision. So let's have a think about what are going to be the good investments going forward and what are going to be the investments which are challenged or doomed, for example. There would have been a time you could have invested in stagecoaches or canals at the time that the railways and the motor car were being invented. Well, were you in the canal or the stagecoach business, or were you in the transportation business? Did you have the vision to see what was going to be happening? Are you ahead of the game? So there are examples here, companies which are well positioned at the moment, but may not be, companies which were well positioned and don't even have an industry anymore, like Blockbuster. And then we've got animal agriculture. What's the future of that? Tobacco, petrol, and what's the emerging technologies that are going to be the winners? If anyone can invent a carbon capture technology which is effective, it would be literally priceless. So I think it doesn't have to be a gamble. If you invest in an average fund which invests in a bit of everything, you will get the winners and you'll get the losers. Or you can try and invest in individual companies which are making a difference and maybe tilt the odds in this gamble in your favor. Last couple of slides to talk to something which I call the risk spectrum. On a scale of 1 to 100, let's say that 1 is super safe. It's like a bank account. You won't lose any money in absolute terms, but inflation means the value of your money goes down because you don't get much interest, but the price of stuff goes up a lot. And 100 might be an outright gamble on an outsider on a horse race, for example. Shares, property, bonds, the stuff that we're talking about today, it's at the lower end risk of the spectrum. And if you invest in a wide portfolio of shares, you reduce your risk. If you're only investing 2 or 3 shares, the risk goes up. If you invest in just 1 share, the risk goes up. If you're investing in some businesses which are going to go out of business in the next few years, then you're probably moving up the risk spectrum. And then we're into things which have got very little basis in valuation, like cryptocurrency or emerging markets. So something which is a sensible portfolio of a diversified bunch of shares would look like a sensible investment. And to finish, and to maybe finally answer the question of, is it all luck? Line C on there, the very straight line, is basically the return that you would have got from investing just in bank deposit rates over the last 5 years. You would have made virtually no return over a 5-year timeline. You could have invested in the FTSE 100, that's to say an amount invested equally amongst every one of the top 100 biggest companies on the UK stock market would have given you a decent investment return. On the other hand, the line A is one of our higher risk portfolios, still low on that risk spectrum, but this is avoiding companies which are going to be challenged and were challenged through COVID as transportation and oil, for example, valuations fell and being highly aligned to climate solutions and healthcare. I would just argue you can, with wisdom and vision and understanding some fundamentals, tilt the gamble in your favor, and maybe the evidence here is that it's not necessarily a gamble, and that in actual fact being mindful about wanting to do good for people and planet with your money rather than take the exploitative course might also be a profitable thing to do. Not just from the investment point of view, not just from the planet, but to make yourself feel better. So with that, I think we can move on to the Q&A.
Thank you, David, for us running out through the basics. And I think the first question that we've got is quite an aggressive question, but let's just, let me just scroll down to it. Oh, I think it's been deleted, but Shamsba, you remember the question, yeah.
David, if you could speak a bit more about your experience in the industry and how you got started in the industry, and maybe some investments that you've made that have seen you return well and become profitable. So more about you personally and your background and biography, really.
Fine, okay, I always hate these personal ones, but I'll do my best. Well, we talked to one, which was a property investment. And there was a time through the early 90s when property was really difficult to sell. It's almost inconceivable now, but nobody really wanted property and nobody really noticed that the prices were drifting down and down and down. And that the yield was going up. If we remember that slide, 12% yield. I mean, could you imagine anyone being so crazy as to let things get to the point where you could get such a low valuation on an asset that its yield was 12%? Well, if you encounter something like that, doesn't it just have to be a no-brainer that would be something that you would invest in? So to me, the answer was yes. I went to my bank and said, I'd like to buy 10 of these. Can I borrow 400 grand? And they said, no, go away. We'll give you enough to buy one if you're lucky. So it's not always easy to get the money. Now, that just brings on to the question of use of other people's money. It's a great way if you haven't got much of your own, you can go borrow some from somewhere. So banks are a great place to go and utilize the power of OPM, other people's money. And especially with property investing, you're using other people's effort as well, which is your tenant goes out to work, earns a bunch of money, pays it to you, and you pay your mortgage off, and you end up with an asset, having used somebody else's money and somebody else's effort. So might sound quite cynical, but that's just the way that it is. I just talked to two other investments that I've made. One is a company called Impax Capital, IMPAX. I realized that the world was moving towards positive impact and good ethical standards a few years ago. And it just struck me that that company made all of its profit from the funds under management, which it invests in. And it just struck me that their funds under management would have to go up, and consequently the share price would have to go up. And the share price of that company's quadrupled in the 2 years, I think, since I bought it. So it's another example of vision and foresight. And the final investment that I will talk to is investing in myself rather than selling my labor to other people forever. I took the view as an entrepreneur that if I backed myself, the best return that I could make would be on my own effort and upskilling myself and creating my own company or companies, as I have done over the years. I wouldn't underestimate the concept of investing in yourself. Nobody will be more committed to you than you.
Okay, and thank you for that. So there's also another question about just what would be your first top, like the top 10 tips for anyone starting off investing, like something you'd, from your experience, you'd give to anyone else?
Wow, that's quite something to answer, shooting from the hip. Well, so making a start, I think, is probably do something. Take a step into the unknown whilst having the rest of you in safety. So even if it's worth, even if it's setting up an account with interactive investment and putting 100 quid birthday money into it or something, trade a couple of shares, and then you'll learn how you react. If something goes badly, how do you react to it? If something goes well, do you take your profit or do you hang on? And get some experience in real life with some real money, even if it's not much, because that's worth a lot. We can all speculate with the wisdom of hindsight on, well, hey, if we bought Bitcoin a year ago, we would have tenfolded our money. Well, yeah, great, very interesting, but who actually did it, eh? So it doesn't really matter. So make a start. Think about valuation. What can you see that other people can't? What's going to be a disaster that you'll avoid? What's going to be something which could be really great that you could get into? At the Path, we've got a client who invested in a company called ITM Power. He was a reformed alcoholic. He'd been on minimum wage for 10 years, and he phoned us up saying he was about to retire. Well, we couldn't understand how he'd saved this much money. Well, he was buying shares in his company ITM for 10p. And at the time he came to talk to us, they were trading at about £5. So he turned a small amount of capital into a huge amount through nothing more than commitment to clean energy and vision. Then obviously educating yourself, learn more about, well, certainly how to buy and sell, get your trading account set up, do a bit of background reading about smart ways of investing. There's a book by Robert Kiyosaki called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it just talks to the perspective that the entrepreneurial investor has relative to the person who sells their labor for all of their life. And it's quite an interesting perspective. But I would say that, yeah, just do something. I'm going to ask Shams if he's got any comment to make on this.
So my main takeaway would be, David, do you want to just... Yeah. My main takeaway would be to educate yourself even more, whether that's through YouTube videos, but also do your own due diligence. There are books such as The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. And Benjamin Graham is the mentor of Warren Buffett. So one of the richest men in the world. Warren Buffett has made his money over a long period of time, over 50, 60 years. And he's one of the linchpins of the investing industry. So his mentor, Benjamin Graham. So it's clearly worth a read. But I echo what David says, it gets stuck in, whether that's a demo investing account, trading account, whatever, £100 of birthday money, it gives you a feeling that's not theoretical. It gives you a real feeling in terms of how you react to the markets and what opportunities you see and things like that.
Okay.
David, if I might just ask you another question that's sort of a flavor of the day, cryptocurrency and currency in general. So a couple of questions. Forex trading, Do you have any opinions on that? And in an extension to that, what's your position on cryptocurrency? And that might be a nice way to bring in how we would view it at the path as well.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question, because there's a lot of hype.
So,
oh no, David, can you hear me?
yeah.
So yeah, just before we continue, I know at the school right now there's a lot of hype between with cryptocurrency and investing in it, and a lot of people were saying, oh, they made this much money with investing, or like from in Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin or something, and it seems to be a very simple and quick way to make money. But is it true? Is there any myths to be debunked in this?
Okay, Forex I'll touch on lightly because I don't feel massively qualified to comment. It's not something that we get involved in as a business or that I do personally. I think this falls into the category of speculation to some degree. Some currencies you can get a very high rate of interest in, which might be more attractive than sterling, but the question is, what is the value of that currency going to do relative to the currency that you want your money to end up in? Unless, of course, you've got expenditure in that currency. So I think you're kind of using your gut instinct to guess which way movements are going, or in fact, you may be a very educated, predictable view that you've got. So I would just say, if you feel you've got vision in that area, go for it. Probably not massively volatile as it goes. Cryptocurrency, on the other hand, is, well, yeah, sure, it's an absolutely fantastic way to make tons of money really, really, really quickly, isn't it? Well, let's just suppose you bought Bitcoin 10 days ago. Now, how are you feeling? As we can see, I mean, so Bitcoin bobbled around at the sort of $6,000 to $8,000 mark for a couple of years, and then, well, the view was, of course, that why would money not go digital? Surely it's better to not have the infrastructure of fiat currencies. Surely you don't need to rely on buildings to have a currency. Surely existing currencies are susceptible to fraud, and blockchain technology takes all of that out of the window. So kind of no wonder it took off. And I'll bet you the price of Bitcoin in a couple of years' time or 5 years' time is, or you name it, Ethereum. It won't be where it is today, but will it be $300,000 a coin? Will it be $1 million a coin, or will it be zero? I wouldn't like to be called on that, because there are challenger technologies to blockchain in its current format. So maybe Bitcoin becomes the new currency. If you work out what the total value of all the Bitcoin in circulation is, it's quite a lot. Could it continue on and go up another tenfold? Maybe. Could a challenger currency come in and destroy the value of it? Maybe. Is it an environmental disaster? Bitcoin mining uses the energy equivalent of the whole of Ireland, for example. So, that's a problem. And then you've got people like Elon Musk who are promoting it 1 minute and then damning it the next minute and promoting dodgy coin as the new future. Well, there's even less intrinsic value in that than there is in some of the more established cryptocurrencies. So, I would say it's highly speculative. And it might be one where you would say, if the value, I mean, my son, who's the same age as you guys, he's going, I can't believe I've got an opportunity to buy Bitcoin at $37,000 or whatever it is. Today, I'm going to pile into it. And I say, well, fine, good luck. Probably the upside is more than the downside, but there's still a huge risk with it. So, hard to say. With all of these things, it's a question of your view of what's going to happen in the world. And I would certainly be reading up on the challenger technologies to to Bitcoin before plunging in massively. But yeah, look, it's so volatile. You can certainly make some very, very quick money that way. Or as we've seen in the last week, you can certainly lose some very quick money as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have other questions about, is living of dividend payments possible and or probable?
Well, it almost inevitable, I would say, really. I mean, a lot of portfolios that we invest for clients will be ones which are income oriented. That's to say, you've got sufficient capital that you can live on the dividend income. So can you replace all of your income with dividend income? Yes, absolutely. Why not? And profitable companies that have got a dividend policy, that have got a sustainable dividend policy, should keep paying that dividend out year after year after year. Boring, boring, boring. There aren't many cases where dividends have been cut for prolonged periods of time. Banks were one in the post-Lehman crisis of 2008. Oil companies are somewhat challenged at the moment. Royal Dutch Shell cut its dividend for the first time, I think, in its history last year. So one needs to be cognizant of the risks, but with a well-balanced basket of high dividend yielding investments, probably it's a pretty safe bet.
Okay, thank you. So there's how do you weigh your own evaluation of a stock against what seems to be the market's / public's opinion?
What a great question. Well, there's a thing called efficient market hypothesis, I think it's called, if my memory of the textbook serves me right, serves me well. Shams is nodding, which says that all of the information that can be known about a given stock is already in the public domain. So prices should be at fair value. And I guess that just says that the herd is heading in a particular direction. So I guess you need to ask yourself, or the flock, to put it in sort of shepherding terms, are you one of the sheep that just goes with that, or are you prepared to take a different road? And I think that's where the vision piece comes in, and only you can trust your gut instinct in terms of what your belief is about something relative to what everybody is saying. I'm really racking my brains to think of an example of where, in inverted commas, everybody thinks that ... and then a couple of years later or a couple of minutes later, people are going, well, of course we could all figure out that was going to happen, couldn't we? So it's being the one that figures it out before the herd mentality drives everyone there, then you can steal a march on what's going to happen. I can't say more than that. It just comes down to trying to look at something which will emerge. And Tesla would be a good example of that. You wouldn't have really had to be a genius to figure out that EVs were going to take over from internal combustion engines, at least in the short or medium term, shall we say.
Okay. So there's a very, very important question. It's $19 Fortnite card. Who wants it? So that's the other question, I think. That links to so just what you were saying is like finding your own niche. I think we talked about it earlier. I talked about with Shams as well. It's about if you think that you have you're specializing in something, or something more in a stock or something, then you can say that you have an advantage in it. I was talking about AMD with Shams on Sunday, and he was saying that since you have a bit of knowledge into this more than others, then that could play a part in your own evaluation in terms of if it's compared to the public's opinion. Would you agree? Would you agree with that?
Very much so. I think that, and it could even be something that a generation, or there is an advantage if you've got a particular knowledge in a sector. If you're buying GPUs and you find you can't get them anymore, and you might just think to yourself, well, what's going on here? What effect will this have on the share price of the manufacturers of this? I think it's your own experience. I think I mentioned on our last call, I bought a jacket from Marks and Spencer's about 20 years ago, and I barely got it home and one of the buttons fell off, and it turned out it had been sewn on with about 5 centimeters of really cheap, nasty thread. And I thought, well, this is in contravention of the principles of this business. They're cutting corners. They're not the reliable brand they're meant to be anymore. People are going to stop trusting this brand because they're being cheapskates, and that's not what you expect. And sure enough, the share price had gone down by about 50% within a year. So you can use your day-to-day experience of things to have a pretty shrewd idea of what might go on, and none more so than oil and hydrocarbons. I feel, really, is that the business of the future? Is that where you're going to make your fortune from? Is this the emerging technology, like digging stuff out of the ground and burning it? I really, really, really can't see your generation tolerating that. So why on earth would you invest in something which is almost inevitably in the long run going to go down, unless these businesses repurpose themselves to understand that they're in the energy business, not the hydrocarbon business? So these are the things you need to take into account.
And there's another one. As of now, are green companies easier or harder to make money on?
Wow, that's a great question as well. I guess if you would have had the vision a year ago to put money into them, you would have seen a lot of upside to your investment. Over the last couple or 3 months, you've seen a bit of froth coming off valuations, which have been quite exuberant. There is an emergence now of the 3 metrics which make up ethical investment, which is environmental, social, and governance. That's to say, what impact is this company having on the environment? What impact is this company having on its clients and its stakeholders and its employees? These ESG factors are getting taken into account in valuations more. So we're seeing a nervousness of companies to invest in companies with poor ESG metrics, and we're seeing more of an emphasis being put on that. So I think companies with good, there's a correlation between good ESG and let's just say good ESG performance and good financial performance. There seems to be a positive correlation there. So if that trend continues, I would suggest that, everything else being equal, the companies with the better track record and the better practices will probably be better placed to be more profitable going forward. And another analysis tool is what we call a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think that the impact investment or the ethical questions are a good SWOT analysis. It looks in particular at opportunities and threats. Is this new clean energy technology likely to be something which is adopted and can do well, for example, versus the threats to, say, a coal company? And we saw an example in Australia where a coal company can't get insurance for its operations because the insurance company are so worried about the environmental impact and negative headwinds that this company faces. So yeah, choose wisely. Again, I think the greener companies are probably better placed.
Okay, just to wrap up with the final 2 questions. So there's, is investing in mutual funds, ETFs, and stocks the best way to invest? And what are your views on thematic investing?
Well, look, mutual funds and such like are a great way to do 2 things. 1, get a really low cost investment, and 2, get a high degree of diversification. So if you're going to construct your own share portfolio, it means a lot of work, it means a lot of dealing charges and all the rest of it. ETFs, you can go in, buy a hugely diversified portfolio, often with a theme, if that's what you want, and at extreme low cost, and often with a regular payment going in. You can set a standing order up and buy so much every month. So hooray for all that. It will be so well diversified that you'll get a kind of dumbed down or averaged performance, I suppose, to some extent. So, but again, to the risk question, it's a really, really great way of de-risking a portfolio. And thematic investment, yeah, if you want to give a tilt to something that you believe in, then sure, absolutely, go for it. If you'd invested in clean energy funds a couple of years ago, you'd have made out like a bandit, for example. If you'd invested in a fossil fuel fund, you probably would have done pretty badly, or an airline type theme. So yeah, I would say all of these things are a question of risk management. The more you deviate from the average, the more opportunity and indeed the more threat you face.
Okay, thank you. I think we're basically done with all the questions. Yeah, just to end off, I think we have exams coming up, and it's yeah, we need to make sure we spend all our time doing that. And then after we have the summer, and that's a lot of time to actually to develop our skills, and probably we'll start start paying the dividends later if we start really learning these skills now. And basically, we're just looking to get this talk was the first just to get the balls rolling. And if you have any ideas or want to start something with me, just let me know. And over the summer, we can do something and bounce off each other's ideas. And I'm looking forward to this being a proper thing, weekly or 2 weeks after the next year, where we can actually start bouncing each other's ideas and whatnot. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, David, any last words? What is that?
One last word, I forgot to say, top tips. Make sure you've got an active and vibrant investment club, and then you can debate these topics amongst yourselves, and you can also hold each other's feet to the fire as to who does something, and then have a laugh at who's done well and who's done less well. Yeah. So that would be the end for me.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for coming, and perhaps even in the future you could come in and just to review how much this has paid off. Literally. Thank you.